Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you all to a brand new episode of the Boombox Guru. I'm your host, LB, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about some of the best albums to come out of the new metal genre, man. New metal was a subgenre that got real popular around the late 90s and early 2000s, something that was kicked off by the band Korn and a lot of other bands like Limp Bizkit, Papa Roach and so forth. They all helped to popularize this genre, and it blew up real big. Uh, it died down sort of somewhere around like 2002, 2003, and it's recently in the past few years it started to make a comeback. There's a lot of these newer modern bands. They're kind of bringing back in those elements into the new modern metal sound. So it's had somewhat of a revival. What a lot of these bands did, they took like funk, they took like metal, hip hop, and so forth, and other genres such as industrial and things of that nature, and they kind of just fused it together and made this genre called new metal. A lot of these bands had a vocalist who rapped or who sung or who did both. Uh, some bands even had DJs that did DJ scratching, which even helped to implement more of that hip hop element into the sound. Also, a lot of the bands, they didn't look like metal bands. They kind of dressed in like more hip hop kind of rap attire, wearing jerseys, like really baggy clothes and things of that nature. So it had its own kind of like style and flavor, man. And this is a genre that really received a lot of heavy criticism when it came out. A lot of people in the metal community don't really consider it to be metal or truly a part of it. Metal music. A lot of people hate this genre, but then there's also a lot of people that love it. That grew up on it. I'm one of the people that grew up on it, so it was a big part of my upbringing. So I'm a bit biased to it. I enjoyed it. These type of bands actually introduced me to like more heavier like metal music and stuff like that. So I have a soft spot for it. And even though there were a lot of generic like bands to come out of this genre, there were a lot of good bands that are still thriving to this day who released a lot of classic albums. So for me, new metal does not automatically mean a terrible band or a terrible record. There was a lot of bands that did some unique things and actually actually put a good spin on the genre, man. So without further ado, we're gonna go ahead and get into this video. I picked 5 albums that I think are some of the best to come out of the new metal genre. So without further ado, let's get into this video. We're gonna start with my 5 albums that I think are some of the best to come out of new metal. All right, so we're gonna start with my first pick, which is Korn's debut self-titled album, which came out in 1994. And this album right here, this is the record that started the new metal genre, that started that whole movement. Nobody was doing what Korn was doing at that time. That sound that they came with, it was fresh, it was new. People didn't know what to think of it. I mean, nobody knew what to think of it. Korn, when they first came out, they were being put on tours with bands like Megadeth and so forth because the record labels, their label didn't know how to market them. That's how fresh and new this sound was. But to me, this album is like the Black Album of new metal because it was such a game changer. Because so many bands came in and they pretty much copied that style and ran with it. Although Korn did benefit from it very much, but then there was also a lot of other bands, like a lot of legendary bands that saw this sound and they also started to go more in that direction as well. And it just set off a whole movement, man. It just set the stage for a whole freaking what 5 or 6 years of dominant music that became like the premier thing on like MTV, that whole MTV TRL era, man. And I mean, it just took over, man. So many people just grabbed onto this, man, and it spoke to a generation of people who weren't really into stuff like maybe Iron Maiden or Judas Priest and that type of stuff. It kind of had sort of like a grungy aesthetic to it. I think it really appealed to the people that were more into like the alternative metal movement that started in the late 80s and early 90s, that grunge era, because this was right after the grunge era was really starting to die down, and new metal really kind of took those like angsty elements and brought that into this sound as well. And not to mention, I think they really kind of like, Korn they looked like hip hop kids too, so they appealed to that crowd as well. You know, if you remember, Jonathan Davis used to wear those like customized Adidas suits and everything, and you know, feel these bass was real funky, man, and a lot of those rhythms were really kind of hip hopish and funky, and in so many ways, you know what I mean. So I think they really appealed to that crowd as well, man. But what just a groundbreaking record that really set the stage and really changed the game, man. And there's no way I could talk about new metal without mentioning this album, because this was the record that started it all. This was the record that just changed the game, and it's a landmark album in my opinion. So Korn's self-titled debut album released in 1994, and this is my favorite Korn album, man. I listen to this Korn album all the freaking time. It's my favorite. It's my go-to. All right, so next album that I want to talk about is Seppatora Roots, released in 1995. And you know, this record, man, you know, it was a point of contention for a lot of Seppatora fans, because you know, prior to this record, Seppatora were more of like a death thrash band, and then you know, with Chaos AD, they started to move into the more groove metal sound, and also while adding in other elements such as like their like tribal Brazilian culture and stuff into their sound, which they were gradually doing with each album. But this record, they went the new metal route. Ross Robinson even produced this record, and you can hear his touch all through this record. It has those rhythms, it has that style, it has that particular Ross Robinson touch that you heard on the Korn records, man. But Roots by Seppatora is more than just a new metal album. Even though I'm including it on this list, they just did so much with this record. I mean, the way they added in the world music, like the way that they kind of took you into their world of their Brazilian culture and heritage, the way they collaborated with musicians from their native Brazil, it was just remarkable, man. They really just took it to the next level. I mean, this is one of the most unique new metal albums to ever come out, in my personal opinion. It stood out from the rest. I mean, it was not a generic bland carbon copy of what Korn was doing. Seppatora did new metal the Seppatora style, and honestly, I think Roots helped set the stage for their subsequent albums that they did during, you know, when Derek Green joined the band. You know, a lot of those albums after this kind of retained those elements and those like tribal world elements, as well as this record helped to set the stage for Max Cavalera's band Soulfly. So just a groundbreaking record, man, and one of the most groundbreaking and unique albums to come out of new metal. I mean, it's still an influential record, man. I think you look at bands like Alien Weaponry, you could say that they've taken influences from this Roots era Seppatora, or even like Gojira in some form of fashion, man. So it's definitely one of the most influential new metal albums, in my opinion. And even though it is new metal, man, they still retain a little bit of the elements of the prior records. I mean, the groove metal was still there. Max Cavalera's vocals, he still got those more aggressive, almost borderline death metal approaches to his vocals. It's still a heavy record, man. And it's not like Max Cavalera started wearing Adidas suits, or he started rapping and so forth and like that, and they added a DJ to the band. There's nothing to that effect. It's definitely new metal in Seppatora's style. So in my opinion, this was more or less Seppatora and Ross Robinson, the meeting of great minds, and they came together and they put out a remarkable record. So that's my next pick, Roots by Seppatora, man. Classic new metal record. Okay, so my next pick is The Burning Red by Machine Head, released in 1998, man. All right, so this album got a lot of backlash when it was released, man. And to some extent, I understand why it got a backlash, because Machine Head totally changed their style and image with this record. I mean, Rob cut his hair. He was rocking blonde spikes. They were rocking like the Adidas suits and everything. If you knew Machine Head from the Burn My Eyes era, you would understand what I'm talking about, because they did a complete 180 with their image, and I think that was more so where the flat came from. Aside from that, man, this is new metal. I believe Ross Robinson also produced this record, but there's a lot of great songwriting on this record, man. I think this is some of Machine Head's best songwriting, actually, man. Rob, he implements a lot more of his clean singing vocals, which I think Rob Flynn does not get enough credit for being a great singer. And the songwriting on here is just awesome, man. It's the record is heavy, but it's also melodic, and they still retain a lot of those heavy groove metal riffs. Not so much of the thrash metal element that the previous records had. It's not there, but it's definitely groove. It's definitely groove, man. And it still got somewhat of an aggressive touch to it, but it's just a good album, man. This is actually one of my favorite Machine Head records, man. I listen to this on a countless basis, man. I listen to it all the time, man. It's just a really great record. The songwriting on here was just really good, man, and I really enjoyed this record, man. And I just think it's really dope. I think it doesn't get enough credit. I think a lot of people overlook it because of the new metal stigma that it has on it. But like I said, all new metal was not terrible. There were a lot of great records that came out during that period, and the Burning Red is one of them. It's one of the standouts to come out of it, man. And it also has a bit of kind of an angsty feel to it, and I also get slight hints of maybe kind of an Alice in Chains kind of vibe to some of the songs. But it's just a remarkable record, man, and I think that it deserves a lot more credit than what it gets. I don't think that it's well, yes, I would say it's more of an underappreciated classic, man, because there were just so many good songs on this record, man. From start to finish, I think this was an awesome record, man. So The Burning Red by Machine Head is another one of my picks for one of the best new metal albums to ever come out. Don't listen to the critics. Don't listen to the haters, man. Definitely check this album out for yourself and be the judge of it. I personally think that anybody that hears The Burning Red will agree with me that it's definitely one of the best new metal albums ever released. Okay, so my next pick is System of a Down's self-titled debut album, released in 1998. And this isn't my favorite System of a Down album. That would actually be Mesmerized, which came out back in 2005. But I wanted to put this one on the list because I think that out of all the System of a Down's albums, this is the most new metal sounding that they ever did. I mean, they even looked at new metal at this point, wearing like the baggy jeans, and if you just look at pictures of them from back then, you'll know what I'm talking about, man. They definitely had that look. But it's also one of the most interesting new metal albums because they're also adding in a lot of their Armenian heritage, a lot of those kind of Armenian folk sounds into the sound as well. Similar to what Seppatora did with Roots by adding in their Brazilian culture into it. They're doing the same thing here, man. And not only that, man, but there's also some thrashy moments on this record as well, man. You can definitely tell that the band was taking some cues from Slayer, who was their label mates at the time and so forth. You can definitely tell that a lot of those thrash metal influences were also prominent here, man. But definitely System of a Down's heaviest album and probably one of their darkest records, man. Compared to the other records, yeah, this one is pretty dark, man. It's pretty dark. They're most aggressive. I think Surge, his vocal style on here is probably his most aggressive and brutal. A lot of kind of screams and aggressive type of deliveries on here, man. But definitely an awesome debut record. Wasn't as huge as the next album, Toxicity, and the subsequent albums, but definitely a solid debut from these guys, man. So I think one of the best new metal albums to come out. Definitely had to put this on my list as well. So System of a Down's self-titled debut, released in 1998. Okay, and last but certainly not least on this list is Mudvayne's debut album, LD50, released in 2000, man. Man, this is one of the most remarkable new metal albums that I've ever heard, man. And I know that sounds crazy, man. It's new metal, but still, the way that they took progressive rock and progressive metal and blended it in with the sounds of new metal was just amazing, man. One of the most technically proficient new metal albums I've ever heard. I mean, you just got to listen to this record. The big song from this record was Dig, but Dig is honestly probably the weakest track on here, man. It definitely does not symbolize what this record was, man. This record was so much more, man. I mean, there's kind of like funk elements on here. The real star on here is bassist I can't think of his name, Ryan Martini, I believe. Yeah, Ryan Martini. He's the real star on here, man. His bass playing on here is just so stand out, man. You can definitely tell that he was a jazz guy. I mean, his technique, it almost sounds like Jaco Pastorius, man. Like that, his like electric bass playing, it's just so significant to a lot of the songs on here, man. But he's the real star on here, man. But Chad Gray, awesome vocals. Uh, Sorry about that. The phone's ringing. But anyway, just aggressive vocals. The way he uses the dynamic between like the clean singing as well as his more kind of guttural styles, man, is really cool. It's just really cool, man, how they did this record, man. I think it's just one of the most groundbreaking albums to even come out in new metal. And unfortunately, man, you know, they didn't really. To me, this is the only album that Mudvayne did that really matters, in my personal opinion, because the records that they did after that really, with each album, man, it just got worse and worse, man, to the point where they became like a generic rock band. So this is really the groundbreaking masterpiece that they put out right here is LD50, man. But just a great record overall, man. And honestly, one that I would say that really showed that there was so much more that could be done with new metal aside from just the typical. And it, you know, it just doesn't get better than this, man. This was such a record that just took off, man. And it a lot of people that really didn't even like new metal even enjoyed this record. You know what I'm saying? I know a lot of people that couldn't stand new metal that say, hey, LD50 was really dope, man. So definitely another groundbreaking album to come out of new metal. All right, so that's it for my picks of the best new metal albums. Like I said, these are just some of the picks, man. There's a lot more new metal albums that I could make a whole nother video about. But if you guys enjoyed this video, man, do me a favor. If you could just hit that thumbs up and give me a like, it helps with the algorithm. Also, be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that bell so you'll be notified anytime I drop any new content. And I appreciate each and everybody that's been viewing the videos, that's subscribed. And as always, I hope everybody has a blessed day and a blessed week. And love, peace, and music. Peace out.